The entertainment industry has always been filled with egomaniacs. Not only are people with mental illness drawn to it in the first place, but when you're starting off, it seems like it takes a level of delusion to keep putting yourself through such a grueling process. So being a self-aggrandizing narcissist can actually be very helpful, because you're able to take a lot more rejection than the average person without ever really second-guessing yourself. And although having a big ego can definitely be a bad thing, it seems like it's usually necessary in order to become successful. But when you find someone who's willing to set aside their ego and be a part of something bigger than themselves, they can be an incredible asset. They can make the difference between a mediocre product and a good one. In this video, I'm talking about Ben Avery's journey, from being thought of as just another podcast producer to having a fan base and successful podcast of his own. Now, Ben grew up with a very conservative Christian family in North Texas. Here's a clip of him talking about what his household was like as a kid.
Were you the missionary type of guy?
Yeah, so
Wow.
well, especially the family dynamic of all of these people, because they all feel like strangers. And that's kind of how and by the way, I'm not saying before any comments I'm not saying any of this like boo-hoo, I feel sorry for myself.
Right.
This is all interesting to me. I don't feel bad. I'm starting my own family. I'm having a baby in like 2 weeks.
Oh,
I don't.
Whoa.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm hoping it's mine.
Yeah.
No, my wife is like 32 weeks pregnant right now. So she's
I thought you were saying 32% shirts.
Yeah.
so like I'm not a guy who holds on to this stuff. This is what it felt like growing up. It felt like we were all strangers in the house. And we were all Christian, and we all is like hardcore conservative Christian. No dancing, no instruments in the church, no clapping. Everyone was going to hell except for our sect. Okay,
Right.
so it was like 1 degree removed from like, juggling like rattlesnakes and shit.
Right.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's the context, is I came from a similar background as the missionary in this movie, right? And all the characters felt like my family in a weird way, because everybody lacks the same thing. And so no one can give the thing to the other person that they need, because they themselves lack it.
But because communication was so restricted in their house, it seems like Ben and his brothers kind of developed their own unique sense of humor and found other, less conventional ways of expressing themselves.
Remember Reservoir Dogs? It blew my mind when I was 16, because I put in the VHS tape player after my parents went to bed, and I was like, "You can make movies non-linear. You can have cussing in them." Like I've never seen.
You have only watched like the
that.
10 Commandments.
Yeah.
Dude, I never seen anything hyper violent like that.
Right.
And I've read the Bible.
What year
at
was
that point.
this?
So I was 16. So this was 2000 and
Oh, wow.
6 or 7, I guess.
Wow.
And then that changed everything for me. And then I started writing tons of screenplays. That's what I started writing. And all I wanted to, so then I started making more sketches and putting them on YouTube and just writing them all the time. Then I started performing in the pep rallies and at the talent show at my high school. I started doing stand-up. I got banned from the only open mic in my hometown.
Nice.
And I was just I just wanted to make stuff. And I didn't realize I was trying to like express myself, right?
Right.
Eventually, Ben managed to get himself an internship at Funny or Die, which allowed him to move out to LA and break into the comedy scene. And although he was finally able to meet like-minded people and gain experience in the field that he was so interested in, he still found himself having to work minimum wage jobs in order to get by. He wasn't able to become fully self-sufficient until he started producing podcasts.
Yeah, and I think I was making $12 an hour at the dog food store, minimum wage in LA. So as soon as I was making like $1,800 a month, which was more than what I was making at the dog food store, I quit that job, and I was like, I can't believe this. I have like financial I felt like I was just walking around town like fucking swing. I felt like it's that scene in Dumb and Dumber when they come in with the tuxedos and they're swinging the canes and shit. Like I thought I was like Mr. Hodge.
When Ben was introduced to Tim Dillon, I think he was already working on 12 other podcasts. However, I would imagine that he quickly realized that Tim was different from the rest of the people he was working with. He was an incredibly ambitious comedian and a very talented podcaster. And as the two of them got to know each other, he started to involve Ben more and more in the projects that he was working on outside of the podcast. So not only does this person that Ben started to work with have all this potential, but he's starting to see the same potential in Ben, which I'm sure was incredibly validating for him. In my opinion, this is the point in Tim's career where he's the most appealing. He's still incredibly hungry for new opportunities, and his frustration with not being as far ahead as he thinks he should be gives his rants substance. He hasn't gotten to the point where he's just reinforcing an image that he's created of himself, and it still seems like he actually has passion for the things that he rants about. He was still working on his first full-hour special, and even talked about producing and starring in his own comedy film. And although his podcast was incredibly entertaining, it hadn't yet defined him as a comedian. It really did seem like the sky was the limit for Tim, and Ben was the person that he had chosen to accompany him on his journey, or so it seemed at the time.
Who's your best friend?
Ben.
Okay. But
What do you mean?
what happens when there's no pie left, as you would say?
When I don't do the show anymore?
What happens when
Me and
his
Ben will
wife
be
finally
friends.
says, him or me?
No, he makes money. He fucks his wife. How long do you need to fuck someone? 12 hours? Like, what are you talking about? You can fuck every night.
What is your dynamic with Ben's wife? Is there any tension?
We have sex. They bring me into the bed once a month. Ben is truly the only thing I care about on earth. Like,
It's very true.
Ben is the only thing I care about on earth. Literally, there's a few people in this room and you. I would watch you all burn alive if I knew that I could save Ben. I wouldn't even try to save any of you. To save women at the expense... No, Ben is my brother and best friend. I mean, Ben is the only person really in my life that I know will stay there forever because we built the thing from the ground up.
Also,
that
he has
people like.
Stockholm Syndrome. What choice does he have? He is a beaten man that you have blackballed in the business and said
I
if
know,
anyone
he could
hires
be,
him...
I know, he could be getting you out of a tub. I know, I get it. It would be much better. It would be much better. I understand. But I don't think the fact that I work with him invalidates the friendship.
Okay.
This kid believed in me when no one believed
I
in me.
agree.
When you didn't, when
I
Joe
still
Rogan
don't.
didn't. Agreed. When none of you knew who I was and didn't really care, Ben thought I was really funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But with all this talk of Ben being irreplaceable and having an equal role in building the show from the ground up, it still seems like he was ultimately viewed as an employee. Now, anybody who's familiar with him knows that Tim is likely to berate anyone who gets in his way or even slightly annoys him. And Ben acted as a type of lightning rod for these attacks on the show. And although Ben agreed to play this role, and it was all in the context of a bit, it seems like the abuse would continue even when the cameras weren't rolling. Ben was subject to being called useless and stupid off the show as well, with Tim holding things like his salary and position over his head. Tim would even go as far as firing Ben and then rehiring him with a higher salary to make up for it. Trying to make up for abusive behavior with money is a common theme in Tim's life.
People that aren't willing to make like any sort of emotional sacrifice, typically they want to throw money at their problems when everybody else is like, no, we don't really care about your money. We kind of want you to just say, like, we want you to be a human being, actually.
Right.
How about you be a human being and treat me like a human being?
Yeah.
I don't want your fucking money. In fact, it's patronizing.
It also seems like Tim would throw Ben under the bus for things that weren't even necessarily his fault. A good example of this is when he chose Ben to produce his comedy special, and when it wasn't received as well as he would have liked, he blamed it on Ben's editing skills rather than his own material. It seems like there are times that he would use Ben as a sort of buffer, so he wouldn't have to be held accountable for his own merit. It was definitely a toxic relationship, And I think Tim kind of made Ben feel like nobody else could find him useful or appreciate what he brings to the table. And as the Tim Dillon Show grew in popularity, it seems like Tim's desire to do things outside of the podcast started to fade away. And although it's completely understandable for Tim to stick with what works after almost a decade of trying to find success, it still completely redefined Ben's role in their relationship. It reduced him from being Tim's partner who worked behind the scenes on all his projects to just being Tim's podcast producer. And it's obvious that Ben wanted to achieve more than that in his own career. What had once been an exciting new opportunity that presented endless possibilities to Ben had now become a predictable, dead-end job. Not only was his work relationship toxic, but he had become ultimately defined in the eyes of the public by the person that he had grown to resent. I think he wanted to be known to the world as more than just Tim Dillon's podcast producer. If you consider all the different factors that I've talked about in this video, then it's pretty easy to understand why Ben decided not to come back to the Tim Dillon Show. But regardless of how motivated he was still making the decision to give up his only source of income and turn his back on the only person that he had been associated with in the eyes of the public. It was an incredibly brave decision to make, and I think it speaks volumes about his character that he was willing to risk almost everything he had in his career to do what he actually wanted to do. And a lot of people seem to notice the difference once he left. To a lot of us, he wasn't just the producer. He was a fundamental part of the show, whose friendship with Tim brought levity and depth to the otherwise cynical and almost shallow theme of the Tim Dillon Show. Now, I've talked about this a little bit before, but it kind of seems like Tim Dillon reads the people around him and tweaks his personality based on what he thinks will get the best reaction. The Tim Dillon that you get on his own show is slightly different from the one that you would get on JRE or a show like Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. And although this is a great quality to have as a comedian, it kind of makes you wonder who he actually is as a person. And even though Ben probably is the best example of someone that Tim's made to feel special in order to keep them around, he's certainly not the only one that Tim's done this to. I think that Tim is extremely good at making people feel validated or special for even being in his presence.
The women that listen to the show, they're on a higher vibrational plane than the rest of them. That's it. Sorry. Same with the gay people listening to this show. Men. Anyone who's listening to this show, you are on a higher vibrational plane than the rest of society. You are better than they are. And that's why you should gamble.
Now, I know that this is just him trying to be entertaining while he's reading an ad for a gambling website, but I honestly do believe that this is a major undertone throughout his podcast. And although these do kind of seem like calculated and almost pragmatic ways of making and maintaining friendships, I honestly don't know if he does this with the intent of using people or if it's simply the only way he knows how to interact with them. At some point during Tim's childhood, his parents started taking him on different acting auditions, where he was actually able to land a few prominent roles. He was on an episode of Sesame Street and in a musical that traveled around the country. So it definitely seems like his feelings of being special were reinforced at an early age.
Folks, when I was a child, I was rightly told I had a lot of promise. I was told I was very bright. I was told that I was going to be lucky and that my luck was going to be earned and that I was going to be special. I was going to be different. I stood apart from the pack. Many of you were not told that. And that's because that is not the case for many of you. Many of you are not special. You're not different. You don't matter. Many of you.
But even with all this encouragement from Tim's parents, it doesn't really seem like they actually cared about who he was as a person. and didn't really have any emotional involvement in his life besides vaguely telling him that he was special. It's why he's always talking about how uninvolved boomer parents are in their children's lives. And so I think that this mixture of his parents telling him that he was different without actually celebrating the things that made him different led to this kind of calculated and removed way that he goes about making people like him. But someone who can never reveal the more vulnerable sides of themselves will always have a hard time making friendships with genuine people. And the few genuine people you do manage to befriend will eventually start to wonder if they even know who you are as a person. And Ben has probably come the closest out of anyone to finding out who Tim Dillon actually is. Maybe Tim started to lash out at him and resent him because he was afraid of what Ben might find. Now look, I know that I'm 2 years late to this whole thing, and it's already been covered in multiple videos, but I think that these two make great examples for the different types of people that get into this industry. Whether it be the different motivations that they had for getting into it in the first place, or how they reacted differently when they had to face the stark realities of the job. And I don't even really think that Tim Dillon is all that bad of a person either. His relationship with Ben was definitely toxic, but when it comes to comedians that are shitty people, he's probably not even in the top 100. And I don't think that sticking with what works and doubling down on the podcasting warrants any judgment either. The special that he came out with recently wasn't all that great in my opinion, but at least it was kind of unique, and it was interesting to watch him try something new for the first time in a while. I hope he continues to do that. But when someone risks almost everything they have to do what they want to do with the people that they want to be with, it makes you root for them. I think that this is a big reason why Lemon Party fans enjoy the show so much. It's obvious that Devan and Jace view Ben as a friend or brother first and a business associate second. The three of them have a great connection, and you can tell that they actually want to be in the room with each other.
I'm so happy that guys like Shane Gillis and John McKeever, I'm glad that they're getting their due to create something funny. And Tommy Pope, they surround themselves with really funny people. And as Shane has risen in the comedy space, he hasn't shed his close friends that he's created his comedic language with to rise to the top. That's really the secret to Shane's success, is he's not shedding people. And by the way, he's very talented and would be great on his own. Right. I'm not saying he's only good because of the people he surrounds himself with.
He just remembers his friends.
Yeah, and because of that, we get stuff like the Tires sketches. We get stuff like Gillian Keeves. We get stuff where it's we get to see him on SNL and all these other things. And I don't know. It's really cool what guys like that are doing. And I feel like I have a little island over here of guys I really love and I really care about.
Right.
That I think are so talented, and I'm so happy that I get to work with them. I love my brothers so much, and I was just waiting for people to realize how funny he was.
Fuck yeah.
And it's so funny. It makes me so happy to do a show with him so people can finally see like how talented he is. And my friend Devan, who's been making sketches for 12 years in LA and not having really anything to show for it, for people to finally give it up for him.
Right.
And people can see how funny he is. And being around them till 4 or 5 a.m. every night for years has made us all funnier.
Right.
We've been doing Lemon Party for 8 years. I had lunch with George Kimmel like last week, and he goes, "How do you guys do it on the show? Is it pre-written? He goes, "Did you take improv classes?" I go, "No, we're just holding microphones for the first time." Like we've been doing this every night till 5 a.m. screaming and having takes on things and opinions and just trying to make each other laugh.
Right.
And we've only got better at it by doing it millions and millions of times. The chemistry just gets better and better.
Right.
And now we can go out on a live show, totally unscripted. We just did it in LA to a show, and we looked at each other backstage, and we go, "We got to do an hour and a half." I'm like, "Do you have anything planned?
What are we doing?
Do you have anything planned?" We're like, "I got fucking nothing." We're like, "All right." And we went out there and we just started improvising things, and it just built into something, and it became interactive, and it was a great show.
Dude, that's so incredible, man.
So it's just, you can, I don't know, you gotta, that's a Louis showed me the 4th of July movie, what he was editing on his MacBook, and he showed me a cut of it in his apartment. And then he was just talking about making film. He's so smart, dude. And he's so incredibly, he's so talented. It's insane how good we're so lucky to have a guy like Louis.
Yeah.
He's so good. He's so benevolent. He's so generous. He's such a good dude, and but I'll never forget what he said, where he said, you got to find your people and create a cinematic language, and then you don't get rid of them. You work your way up like this.
Not only does this make you and your friends funnier, but I think that if you go about things this way, you can resonate with your fan base so much more than someone who lacks this quality. And although having a forced relationship doesn't necessarily keep you from making great content, I think that it makes things exponentially easier when you actually like the person that you're working with. I started listening to Lemon Party just for the sake of making this video, but I quickly realized why the fans were so enamored with it. And even though the Tim Dillon Show is probably as big as it's ever been, it seems like most of his fans are just casual listeners, kind of like the Joe Rogan experience. Whereas the people that listen to Lemon Party are almost like a community. I guess I'll wrap up this video by saying that it seems like the entertainment industry can be a hollow and depressing place that's filled with shallow people who probably couldn't even make a real friend if they wanted to. But for the people that actually get into it with the best of intentions, I think that eventually you either have to surrender your original idea of what you wanted to do and start playing the game to get ahead, or you can double down, grab the few people around you that you actually like, and try and build a fan base from the ground up. And although the latter of the two requires a lot more work, it comes with the benefit that you know any bit of success you do get is completely earned and built off of something that you and the people you care about created. And I'm sure that's way more rewarding than just using people to get ahead.